couple obstacles today too as well, because I think we have a few we drag into the conversation. Maybe we don't even realize that we drag them into it. But I want to try to put on display today a couple of the things that might be limiting our perception of Jesus. And I want to bust those limits today, just push the limits, no limits, to where you begin to believe that Jesus can do everything and anything that needs to be done in your life. That sounds pretty good to me. Otherwise, we've got a real segmented, caged-in religion in which we got to put Jesus in our box. As long as we get him in our box, he can work. And he wants to work outside of that. Within one generation of Jesus on the earth, within one generation, they were already questioning whether he was even a real guy. John writes the letter of 1 John because he was dealing with a group of people called the Gnostics who said Jesus never even came in the flesh. That's why John opens his letter by saying, look, I saw him, I touched him, I was with him. He was real deal. That was one generation. We're 2,000 years later. And of course, it's still a topic. Was he a real guy? Did he really exist? Can he really do all these things? If he died, did he really raise again? And so if the early church was dealing with it, we know we're going to deal with it now. And so when I try to approach him just intellectually, historically, we approach him by faith. They did their due diligence in making sure people knew he was real. But we can't interview John outside of reading his letters and Paul and Peter and these guys who saw him. And so we have to take it by faith. But even in the midst of that, we tend to keep shrinking the limits down to what Jesus can do. I think sometimes when we're kids, grow up in the church. I grew up in the church. I don't remember a time in my life where I didn't know the name Jesus. I always knew his name. I didn't know anything about him, but I always knew his name and who he was. He was the Son of God. There's little audio tapes somewhere of me as a kid with my dad hitting record on a little tape player. I'm probably 4 years old, and him saying, who's the Son of God? And you can hear me, little baby voice, saying Jesus. And what did he do? Died on a cross. Why? For my sins. All the little quiz questions of who Jesus was. I don't ever remember a time when I didn't know his name, but I think what happens is we have a big image of Jesus. He's massive and there's nothing he can't do. And then we get older and wiser, quote unquote, and his limits, we start pulling in the limits a little bit, the boundaries of what Jesus can touch, until it's all the way down to he only really move within the confines of holiness. He can only move within the confines of Christian discipline. You're going to have to do this and that and the other to really get him to move. And that the older you get, the more mature you get, the less he'll move, because he wants you to move more. You got to do more, and then he'll do more. If you're a little kid, then he'll move because you don't know any better. And I'm saying all this for this reason. I think we have put those limits on Jesus. And I think the Jesus of the Bible has none. Here's a fundamental verse. If you don't know it, it's time to learn it. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It is fundamental to Christians to know Hebrews 13 and 8, because you're going to think at times that's how Jesus used to act, but he won't do that anymore. You're going to be reading the Gospels one day and you're going to see Jesus do something, and there's going to come a little voice that says, boy, that's well and good. Don't you wish you lived back then? But Jesus doesn't act that way now, and you need to be able to counter that voice with Hebrews 13 and 8. Because Hebrews 13 and 8 makes you a promise that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That means if you encounter Jesus in the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, doing something, you have Hebrews 13 and 8 to guarantee you that Jesus can still do it. That he still loves people that way. That he still acts that way. That he still treats people that way. Now, I could give you example after example from the Gospels of how we think he's changed. I won't do so many of those. We'll look at the limits that were placed on Jesus in the Gospels, but I want you to discover this as you go about your business day to day. As you read the Word, you start to see Jesus do something, and you allow the faith that's already in your heart to spring forth to say, Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Here's a scripture. This is a verse I can't make you believe. You have to believe this by faith, that he really is the same yesterday, today, and forever. But Even as you read it, there are red flags going up in your mind that we're going to try to knock those flags down today because some of those are so influenced by our lives and the things we've went through. Here's another one. You saw this one very, very recently, but I want to bring it back to your attention because it's the same concept. Revelation chapter 1, verse 8. Remember the Alpha and the Omega series. But remember what Jesus says about himself. I am the Alpha and the Omega. What is he? The beginning and the end. Watch this. I'm the one who is, who was, who is to come. Sounds a lot like Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ the same yesterday, today, forever. I am who is, who was, who is to come. Jesus is confirming what Hebrews tells you. I've given you a couple witnesses here to let you know that Jesus out of the mouth of an apostle and out of his own mouth in Revelation 1 says, I am always the same. I am the one who did those things in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I am the one who's doing those things right here on the island of Patmos in Revelation chapter 1. And I'm the one who's going to do those things in the future at Midland Church in Poplar Bluff, Missouri in 2014. Or whenever you are reading this text. This makes Jesus timeless. It moves him outside of the timeline. Understand that God always existed outside the timeline. He's the one who created the timeline. He formed the heavens and the earth. He formed who we are. And then he moved in. Stepped into a human body, moved into the timeline of a man named Jesus. And then Jesus died, rose again, moved back outside the timeline. And so it becomes essential now for us to realize that he's the same Jesus even though it's been 2,000 years. Because our mind, everything changes. We don't drive horse and buggy anymore. We drive cars. What's the big deal about that? Well, we know that time means things change. If technology changes and clothing style changes and hairstyle changes and food taste changes and entertainment changes, surely so does God. Surely so does Jesus. And so what Jesus is saying in Revelation 1 is, though I jumped outside of the timeline and went into my Father's realm, I am the one who is, I am the one who was, and I am the one who is to come. So even though I'm not in your time anymore, I am timeless. I will be the same when you encounter me now as I was then. That's a blessed promise. And I don't take it lightly. It's fundamental to the Christian faith because that means the Jesus that you met is the same Jesus Martin Luther met. Yeah. The Jesus you met is the same Jesus Paul encountered on the road to Damascus. The same Jesus you have inside of you is the same Jesus your hero pastor or the person that introduced you to Christ had inside of them. Nothing's changed. Culture's changed. Style's changed. People have changed. The world has changed. But Jesus hasn't changed. Again, this is something that has to be taken by faith.